First, I begin with apologies for the seating. It is cramped, but it's nice to have a full house. The inconvenience is going to be that we will not be able to have tea, coffee service uh, in the hall. So, should you desire to grab a cup of coffee, you will have to step out. We'll give enough breaks and enough opportunities for you to help yourself to a cup of coffee. Uh, Now, you must wonder why somebody who's so good at investment and so good at strategy and so good at turning around businesses and obviously making money, which is the collateral benefit, is here to talk about something so different. The reason is that, within our family, we don't call Rahul, we call him Dr. Bhasin. And the reason we call him Dr. Bhasin, not that he's qualified as a medical doctor, but he could be, because he gets invited by a lot of hospitals across the country to talk to medical doctors and explain to them the importance of diet on health. And today, obviously, we've had the privilege of listening to him on this topic before. I've had the privilege of his friendship and advice for several years. He's helped me through the course of some of my medical conditions. But today it's going to be a long session, which is going to be split into three different parts, and we'll take a break along the way. But we will have the Q&A as we go along. So basically, the talk is about the implications of evolution on modern life. The human body takes a long time to adapt, but technology moves very quickly. Social customs, dietary habits, lifestyle, etc., change very rapidly. So clearly, therefore, there is obviously a mismatch, and that mismatch reflects in many ways medically through diseases that are now becoming common. We call them lifestyle diseases. But Rahul will explain the logic of why this is happening. But more importantly, he's going to tell us what we could do to minimize the risk of ailments and add greater value to enrich our lives. So that's the deal. We all know him, but very quickly, he is the managing partner of Bearings in India. He sits on the global board of Bearings Private Equity. Um, uh, he sits on several other boards, done a remarkable job in several turnarounds, made a lot of money for his investors, and I am very privileged to share his friendship. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you would join me in saying welcome to Dr. Bhasin in our usual way.
I am, thank you everyone, waking up at 8:30. I remember an incident when I was in business school. Our first class used to start at 8:30, and I and two of my friends had this very poor reputation that we never attended any class. The first class at 8:30, we never attended it. And usually we used to sort of roll out of bed, and about 10 in the morning, we used to be rubbing our eyes and having a cup of tea. And the dean of my business school in those days strolled up to us one day when we were just sort of barely awake and said that, it would be so lovely if the three of you attended class sometimes, right? So, given that context, the fact that so many of you are in this room at 8:30 in the morning in this beautiful place, thank you very much for that. So, today we are going to cover 4 different things. Okay, I'm going to talk about the first part of what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to cover, doesn't work. Okay. I'm going to cover diet and nutrition. I'm going to cover social structures and how they've evolved, and what our biology is and what society is and what the imperatives are, our modern lives as we lead them and what the consequences are, and lastly on business and economics. I thought that since this is supposed to be a business forum, I thought that I must include some of the parallels in that, and some of it is actually very interesting, which it became so obvious to me later on, but up front when I looked at it, it was like kind of. But what are we as an animal? What's different about us? Does anyone take a shot? What is different about us? We are an animal like there are so many other animals. Do we have the largest brain? Actually, we don't. Dolphins have larger brains than us. Right? There are many species, but we have this developed prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex, from an evolutionary perspective, is something which is very expensive to develop. Why? Roughly 25% of the energy that you consume in a day is consumed here. Now you just think that from an evolutionary perspective, why would you bother developing this? The fact that it has survived and we have thrived as a species says that this is actually obviously was very valuable, and therefore in what context was it valuable? What were they able to do, and what does this allow us to do as a species? We are the only animal which has the concept of either time or causality. And that's a very interesting notion, because you see a lot of other apes, etc., they can replicate stuff. They can even use tools. There are multiple animals in the animal kingdom which use different kinds of tools. But we can understand why. And therefore we can understand when to use something and when not to. No other species on this planet can do that. And this whole concept of delaying gratification, is again something that it was because of the prefrontal cortex that we learned. What is this delaying gratification? I have food today, I don't have it tomorrow. What is the context in which we've developed? But I ask everybody here, what is your own sense in terms of today you can say that, I don't want to eat this today, I put it in the fridge. When did electricity become mainstream? Worldwide? Less than 100 years ago. Refrigerators becoming mainstream. By the way, most Indians still don't have a refrigerator. But so how did humans defer consumption? Any guesses, anybody? Sorry? So reciprocity. Reciprocity became a big thing, but we'll come back to that issue. But where I was getting to was that if you want to delay consumption, there are two ways of doing it. One is you overstuff yourself now because you know that tomorrow there'll be nothing. Or two, you find some way to preserve food. What is the method that human beings use to preserve food? Fermentation. Fermented foods. So the very fact that we've evolved as a species, fermented foods was a sort of, very core part of what we did. How many of us eat fermented foods today? I'll come back to this, I'll revisit this and sort of maybe just share a little bit of the biochemistry of this with you and the linkage. A lot of things are interlinked, as you'll sort of realize. Planning, organizing, execution of complex behaviors, control impulses, all, flexible thinking. All these are sort of things from the prefrontal cortex. And this is the unique thing about us. But the fact that this developed, comes from somewhere else. And if you look at it, this chart that I've put out here, this is the conventional view as to how human beings evolved, when they evolved. Our primate ancestors 6 million years ago, ground adaptation 3 million years ago, meat consumption. If you look at our genetic history, we are descendants of an animal called prosimians. To put that in context, you know about the lemur? That's in Madagascar. So they are our closest sort of, in terms of lineage, they are our closest. And in terms of modern apes, right? It's the chimpanzees and the bonobos. Our DNA differs from chimpanzees by 1.5% and by bonobos by 1.6%. Not very significant at all. And why do I say not very significant? The DNA amongst human beings differs by 0.9%. And by the way, that's amongst the least differentiation that most species have. Now this is what was believed for the longest time. But if you look at the latest DNA data which is coming out, it is quite clear that this is completely inaccurate reflection of timelines. Why is that? So there is this whole concept called haplotype studies. So human beings have two kinds of DNA in their body, their own DNA and their mitochondrial DNA. The mitochondrial DNA is inherited only through the mother. Right? And people who share the same mitochondrial DNA are supposed to belong to the same haplotype. And if you extend back the studies, one of the things which is coming back in multiple ways, that our single living ancestor that everyone in this room can trace their ancestry back to lived only 150,000 years ago. Not this millennia and all this stuff. So we are actually a very, very new species. We have not been around for millennia. This is inaccurate. Okay? But we have evolved in a particular way. Now, there's also this concept that we used fire 2.5 million years ago. DNA data says that we have been around only 150,000 years, so who was using the fire? Right? Now, and this whole notion of persistent game hunting, I'll revisit this also. Even this is wrong. This was believed, right? You know, we have this notion that our forefathers were hunter-gatherers, right? So one of the basic things is that if you want to survive as a species, then the energy you expend in hunting should be less than the energy you get from hunting, right? That's a very basic premise. So most animals which are evolved to be proper carnivores, you know what is the usual success rate in each hunt? So the closest is Adit, it's actually 5%. Okay? I'm talking wolves, lions, cheetahs, their success rate is usually 5%. Right? And then you get some calories from that. If you look at the way humans are actually organized and our skill sets and our probable success in hunting, our success ratios will be so poor that we will spend far more energy hunting than in sort of the energy that we get from what we hunt. So the fact that this hunting business is there is completely specious according to me. The other thing which is very interesting is that if you look at, now you can actually map the DNA data of, forget about the teeth, of the tartar of the teeth of the fossils. So you would expect that if they were actually hunters, then the tartar of the teeth should have animal remains. None has been found to date. Okay? Now you'll say that, Rahul, you are saying this, but why don't we hear this in popular media? If you all are businessmen, you know that media runs how? On advertising? Who are amongst the biggest advertisers in the world? Food companies, meat companies, dairy companies. You think they want such news to get out easily? What are we optimized for? All carnivores have no color vision. Did you know this? They can't distinguish between red and green. Only herbivores can. Why? We need to know which plant is poisonous, which one is not. Right? No carnivore can. Their eyes are actually been optimized for movement. Their vision, when there is no movement, is very poor, which is why if you see, those of you who have watched National Geographic or Discovery Channel, you'll find that the carnivore is around and its prey, deer or whatever, is very close by but absolutely still. The carnivore can't see it. There's an animal, if you all see the zebra, have you ever wondered why those, black and white sort of cross lines? It's not camouflage. When that zebra is running away, the movement detection for the lion or the tiger or whatever becomes very complicated. They get confused as to, what is this? Because of this different kind of things. That's the adaptation which has happened, which allows them to survive and allows them to get away more often. Right. There is one other thing as far as eyes are concerned. Almost all carnivores, when do they hunt? At night. So what do they have? They have a film at the back of their eyes which actually concentrates light. So they have fantastic night vision. The same technology that people use for night vision goggles and night vision rifles, etc., that actually almost every carnivore on this planet has it. Herbivores don't. We don't. Facial muscles. Strange as it may sound, facial muscles of carnivores are very reduced. They can open their mouth and they can shut it. They can't move it, they can't do, Can you move your jaw? Everybody try. Move your jaw to the right, move it to the left, move it down, rotate it. You can do all of these things. Why do you need to? You need to chew. Carnivores don't chew their food. They bite it and swallow it. Why? They don't digest anything in their mouths. Our digestive process starts in our mouth. We have an enzyme called amylase in our mouth, right? You ever taken a salty biscuit and put it in your mouth and left it there? You find that suddenly after a while it turns sweet. That's your amylase doing its job. So your digestive system actually starts in the mouth. That's true for all herbivores, not true for carnivores. They swallow their food up front. All carnivores. Okay. Mouth opening, a carnivore naturally needs to swallow a huge amount of food, so their mouths open really wide. Right? Most herbivores, you try, how big can your mouth be? Some of you are thinking very naughty thoughts, I can see, but grinding molars, right? If you look at grinding molars, any of you have pet dogs at home? Dogs have evolved from wolves. You'll see right to the back, you'll see canines. You won't see grinding molars. That's typically there in herbivores. Okay. I told you about salivary amylase, side-to-side jaw movement, stomachs. Most herbivores have some kind of chambers, etc., or a stepwise digestion. But let me get back to why mouth opening is so important. Do you know how much of their body weight a carnivore can usually eat in one meal? It's absolutely bang on. 30%. How much can you guys do? Huh? What percentage can you guys do? Why is this 30% important? Because your success ratio as a carnivore is so low. right? So you want to eat a lot at one point in time. If you see a dead corpse, right? You see some dead animal, rotting animal. Instinctively, would you want, a lot of you eat non-vegetarian food. I did most of my life. Is your instinct to want to eat it? No. You don't want to eat it. Why? That's your instinct is that because your stomach acids are not strong enough to kill all the pathogens which will be there already. Carnivores see meat lying around, they'll go grab it and start eating it. Doesn't impact them. Why? Their stomach acid pH is 1. You talk about intestine length. All carnivores have very short intestines. Why? Because after digestion, what's left over is usually some kind of animal protein, etc. The waste is things like ammonia, H2S, which causes them harm. So they want to get rid of any fecal matter as quickly as possible. I'll come back to why we want to actually retain that in our own systems for much, much longer, and which is why we have this complex system and why we have such long intestines and this thing. Yes? I'm not covering it because then that becomes a lot longer. But if you see where we are optimized for, I'll give you a basic thing on the. Here's the data. There is an argument that we could be omnivores, right? But if you look at the data, what it does to our body, whenever we stray from this herbivore diet, it becomes very clear that we are not optimized to be omnivores. We are actually optimized to be herbivores. But, yes? Yes, you can, but if you will allow me, this was done, these slides were made last night and after a lot of alcohol. So if you will permit me, I will clean it up and then share with everybody. Okay? I also have a request for everybody. Can everyone stand up for a second? Okay? Don't move from where you are. Just stay where you are, but just stand up. Now I want you to stand like me, okay? Like this. Stand like this. Is this comfortable? Is it? How long can you stand like this? Sorry? Tell me. Can you stay like this? Every single carnivore's muscles flex when they stand and they are in that position all the time. Why? Why? So that they can take off quickly. You see how sprinters kneel down so they can take off quickly? Carnivores are forever in that position. If you have a pet dog or pet cat at home, go and look. So you will see this requires a lot of energy. So which is why when they're not hunting, etc., carnivores tend to sleep a lot. Because just standing up and sort of being this thing requires tons of energy. By the way, I can give you double the number of these points, but I think this should be enough to... And the key question is what happens when we veer away from what we are optimized for. And I'll come back to that omnivore thing in the microbiome piece, but what are we optimized for? If you move away from a plant-based diet, you'll end up with, usually you eat animals, you'll end up with much more fat. And that has its own kinds of issues. But we'll have all kinds of metabolic issues. If you take away Okay? If you take away animal foods from your diet, all your metabolic diseases will disappear. What are metabolic diseases? Cardiovascular diseases. I can see a hand up. It's 4 short sections. After every section, there's Q&A. Okay, we'll do that. Your microbiomes get disrupted. So here's what's interesting. Our microbiome, we have evolved. Our DNA, okay, we get 3 billion nucleotides from our mother and 3 from our father, so we have about 6 billion nucleotides. But our DNA complexity is almost the same as a fruit fly. We are not a very complex organism. Then how have we done all this development? How have we become what we've become? Because we partner with all the bugs in our microbiome. And that is quite incredible because it gives us a very flexible design. Because you change the bugs in your microbiome, your short-term adaptation changes. Okay? But it has its costs. It has its price. And I'm going to cover this a little bit more in detail, but if you move away and you look at people with more animal diets, you get autoimmune diseases. Right? Multiple sclerosis, if you look at places where there's herbivore diets, multiple sclerosis almost doesn't exist. A lot of autoimmune diseases come up. So metabolic diseases, autoimmune diseases, depression, brain development issues, all kinds of things happen. And food intolerances also happen. Right? Just one small thing for high-fat diets and breast cancer. Can you see where fat consumption is higher when animal foods are used versus breast cancer? You think this is random? Most people in the room will not be interested in this. They might be interested in this slide. Prostate cancer. Animal calcium. You can't get animal calcium unless you're eating animal foods, but it's basically a surrogate. You eat animal foods, your risk of prostate cancer goes up significantly. Milk is animal food, as animal as it gets. Milk consumption. Right? There is, in fact, a gentleman called T. Colin Campbell, very brilliant man, MIT guy, did his PhD in nutritional studies. He was hired by the WHO. Post World War II, what happened is that the American dairy industry had lots of excess amount of dairy because they were supplying to all over Europe, and the European dairy industry came back. And now the Americans said, what do? We have all this excess production. We need to find a market. So what did they do? They donated a lot of money to the WHO and said, you know what? There is this massive protein deficiency all over the world. Please go and educate people that they need to use more protein. And we will solve it for you. We will provide the protein. Okay. So Dr. T. Colin Campbell was one of the scientists who was hired by the WHO. He was sent to the Philippines to go and promote the use of protein for better health. So he went there, but being a scientist, he started collecting data. And what he started finding was that the children, and by the way, this is children's cancers, not even adults. The children that he was pushing his milk and dairy products to, the population, had significantly higher cancers than people who were not using it. And what is even worse, that it was dependent upon the amount being consumed also. So he's actually done studies which show that there is a direct correlation between what percentage of your diet comes from protein. Okay, what percentage of your calories come from protein vis-a-vis cancer? And now this is completely antithesis of what we hear every day. Get your protein, you're not eating enough protein. Don't you hear this every day? Right? Every day you are being told this. What is the science saying? Now the classical thing, right? I find when I tell people that I'm a vegan, almost instinctively the first question I get is, where do you get your protein? I ask everyone in this room, have you seen elephants? Have you seen rhinoceroses? Have you seen horses? Cows, buffaloes? Do they not have muscles? Giraffes? Do they not hang around? Where do they get their protein? Anyone knows? Where do they get their proteins? Every single vegetable that you eat has proteins. Every single vegetable that you eat has proteins. Lentils has proteins. Grains have proteins. Do you know that if you eat one meal in a day of dal chawal, I'm not even going to a vegetable here, one meal a day of dal chawal, and not a heavy meal, like a light, modest sized meal, you will get 19 out of 20 essential amino acids you will get more than adequate of. One you will get about 80% of. And I'm now talking modest meal. If you eat that extra helping, you'll get all 20. Right? And that one, this thing, if you add a little bit of rajma or soya bean or something, you will get tons of that, enough for the next 4 or 5 days. By the way, I'm talking only one meal. Huh? I'm talking out of you all will at least consume 2,500 calories in a day. I'm talking 600 calories here. And I'm saying you're going to get enough protein. So the data that T. Thomas Campbell came out in, and he's written a very incredible book called The China Study, which has got nutritional data, etc., for over 30 years. It's a little heavy reading, but if you all find the time and patience at some point in time, I strongly recommend that book to you. And the reason why I'm a fan of T. Colin Campbell is that T. Colin Campbell is one of those people who has always said and maintained, and through his career, he said, I will not take funding from industry. Because if you look at outcomes from industry, right, and if you want to know how much what you all understand about nutrition is distorted by industry, there's a lady called Marion Nestle who's written, I think, 5 or 6 books as to how science is systematically distorted and wrong science is put out all the time by managing clinical data, by cherry picking part of the sort of sample set. It's makes interesting reading. I mean, Marion Nestle's books are more like crime thrillers than anything else, but and you can otherwise listen to some podcasts around it. Just to give you a sense of cancer, right? This is a real issue. All of us have been touched with cancer at some point in time or the other. We are a multicellular organism, right? All multicellular organisms have developed from single-cell organisms called prokaryotic. And we've become eukaryotic. How do you become from single cell to multi-cell? Look, evolution suggests 2 things. One is survival of self. How do you survive if you are most adapted to the environment that you're in? And 2, evolution optimizes for the second thing, procreation. If you survive and you don't procreate, from an evolutionary perspective, you're irrelevant, right? So you have to have sex, you have to have babies, otherwise from an evolutionary perspective, you are irrelevant. The point is that for everyone sitting in this room, our forefathers both survived and had sex. Otherwise we wouldn't be in this room. Right? So and actually if you think of natural selection in that perspective, natural selection always makes a species stronger and stronger and stronger. Okay? Going back to, what we eat, etc. How many of you are non-vegetarians in this room? How many of you eat meat? How many of you want to eat stale, sickly animal versus a tender, healthy animal? Why? So we are optimized, our mindset is instinctively optimized as that of a herbivore. We want the fresh, tender leaves. Why? They're the most nutritious. All carnivores look for the sickest animal in the pack to hunt. Why? Probability of success goes up significantly. Two, animals don't want to be eaten. They fight back, they kick. A giraffe kick can break the spine of a lion, one kick. So can a zebra kick. Now, the point is, if you are taking on the animal, you want to take on the strongest, toughest guy, you don't. You want to take on the sickest guy. How many of you have come across articles which talk about dogs being able to identify cancer before the cancer is visible in any medical test? Why do they have that ability? They've descended from wolves. They have the ability to figure out the sick animal in the pack. Right? We use it for a very benign purpose for ourselves, but that's the background. And the key thing is that if you look, our DNA developed in such a way, there was a core DNA of single cell organisms, and on top of that a complex DNA was put in this thing to help an organism cooperate. Right? That single cell, the minute you become a multicellular organism, that has to be part of a whole. A single cell from an evolutionary perspective wants to reproduce itself, right? Can you imagine if your eye cells start deciding we want to reproduce? It has to subsume its identity to being part of a whole. And there is a lot of DNA which drives that and determines that. Right? One of the very interesting things about cancer is that most things, you will say if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. In cancer, I can give you a list of 100 things if you do, you will get cancer. Why is that? Air pollution causes cancer, yes. Eating, essentially if you eat very high percentage of your diet in protein, you will get cancer. By the way, plant protein doesn't matter. You can eat higher, it doesn't cause cancer. But why is that? And the common things about cancer is that essentially what happens to the cell is that this being part of a whole, this superstructure of this DNA gets disrupted. It's not necessarily mutated. There's the concept called epigenetically switching off something. So our lifestyles often switch off this superstructure which makes each cell part of a whole. And then it goes berserk and goes rogue. Right? So it's your own cell which goes rogue. I don't want to get into the cancer biochemistry. I'm happy to do a separate session on that entirely. But the bottom line is that it is something which should be killed by your immune system. Now this is the same in nature, right? Your immune system is optimized to identifying self versus non-self. In this case, because it is your own cell, it is very hard to figure out that this is actually non-self. The immune system can. But just like in nature, right, the cancer cell also develops mechanisms to fool your immune system, including with things like checkpoint inhibitors, etc., releasing enzymes and proteins so that the T cells can't do their job. And I mean, if you think about cancer, the reason we get cancer, we replicate our bodies. Most of our cells on average, in less than 3 months, our entire body on average is replicated. It's not in absolute terms because different cells have different rates of recycling within the body. Some blood cells get replaced every 3 days. Our neurons never get replaced throughout our lives. So but the average, you get replaced within 90 days. So the amount of cell replication going on in our bodies is massive. So very small error rates, right? For those of you who lead very healthy lives, do everything right, everything is perfect, you have stress-free life, you're happy, on average, every hour you'll have 400 mutations. Why do we not get cancer? Because those 400 mutations, 399 of them are not viable. The cell dies immediately. Okay? One odd cell will survive. When it survives, it will start to grow. Maybe its replication machinery works, maybe it doesn't. If it is, most likely the immune system will kill it. If it figures out how to fight off the immune system, then it will survive, it will replicate. But the unique thing about all cancer cells is that it also loses its advanced form of respiration. All of us, all our cells, using our mitochondria, using our oxygen, produce from every molecule of glucose roughly 36 ATPs, which is, you can think of it as a power unit of the cell. Cancer cells produce 2. Because they don't use that same oxidative mechanism, they use an anaerobic mechanism, and they produce 2. So they're very metabolically challenged to start with, which is why they need so much energy all the time. Right? Now, if you think of cancer from an evolutionary perspective, there was very little evidence of cancer. Why? So our lives were such that very often we went without food. We were forced to starve every now and then. Now you have a cell in your body which does not have, right? You're foraging for food all the time. It's not necessary you'll get food. You might starve. And when you starve, your normal cell can, with every unit of glucose, produce 36 ATP, so it can do its functions. These cells struggle. So if a person is otherwise very healthy, right, and they've got cancer, and cancer can happen to anybody at any point in time. It's a probability game. But you starve yourself for maybe 10 days or 12 days or something, and I don't advise you to ever do that without medical consultation. But the chances are that your cancer won't survive it, most of the time. Most of the time, by the time the cancer is detected, people are in such frail condition that they can't do that. But in the instances where they are actually healthy, this is short way of actually curtailing cancer very significantly. And not only that, then there is something called the p53 complex in your genes. The p53 complex basically says that if there's an imperfect replication, it instructs the cell to commit suicide. So even your p53 complex has to be compromised in some way. Right? I'm just telling you how low the probability is for you to get cancer at all. Right? Then even if that p53 complex is this thing, you've got rid of the immune system, you still need a lot of energy. So a cancer cell needs to do what's called angiogenesis. What is angiogenesis? It needs to be able to tell the tissues around to build blood vessels to it, because if it cannot, it will never get enough nutrition. Even if this works, right? Our cells are pre-designed to do something called apoptosis, which means commit suicide after their function is over. They have to switch off that mechanism. Now, even if they've switched off that mechanism, can they still survive? Or are there still hurdles? The point I'm making is that you are actually dealing with evolution here. Most cancer cells get wiped out in this entire thing, but the guy who survives is the fellow who's figured out how to adapt to all of these kinds of things. You give chemotherapy, most cancer cells die. 1 survives, 2 survives, they replicate. Now, after they do all of this and they survive, right? You've heard of the concept that as we age and your cell keeps replicating, the telomeres keep shortening. So it actually needs to generate an enzyme called telomerase, which actually regrows telomeres, so that when it keeps replicating, the baby cells are still viable. Right? By the way, I've told you a sequence of things, but the reality is to the power of n more complex than what I just said. Right? But from an evolutionary perspective, that thing is adapting. And the most adaptive is surviving, and which is why, it's very hard to kill the cancer, and ultimately cancers tend to win most of the time. Right? Because the very fact that it's gone through so many iterations means its adaptability is incredibly high. And the problem we have is that for our own immune systems to go through these adaptations to fight these, we are going back to now, again, evolution is the handicap. Why is evolution the handicap? 100 years ago, what was our life expectancy? 100 years ago, 30. 30. Okay? We've been optimized to survive for a certain period of time. If you look at the probability of all these, this cumulative probability of all of these things, by that time cancer was not an issue. So therefore, the body has optimized what? The body is optimized. There is a little organ we have called the thalamus, which is what trains the immune system. If there's anything which is going wrong, it trains the immune system to make it target that thing correctly. Sadly, in human beings, by the time you're 24 or 25, the thalamus ossifies. So something new comes up after that, our ability to actually make custom-built solutions to fight it off are not there. Because as a species, we've never lived that long. We're not designed to be living and chatting and thriving at our age. I can carry on about the cancer, but I'm just saying that they generally have a much more, even then, in terms of life cycle, it's only the secondary cancers which kill you, which means requirement to adapt to even a different environment. But I think let's get away from this. But the bottom line is that the further you get away, what we are optimized for is a fruit and vegetable diet. Okay? Is a fruit and vegetable diet. And we are also optimized in another way, that the vegetarian, when did breeding of cows start? Sorry? No, it's actually longer. There is some evidence that 6,000 or 7,000 years ago in Scandinavia you had some amount of breeding of these things and some consumption of dairy. You also, in human beings, have had 2 genetic modifications which have happened. So, dairy usually has lactose, right? Our ability to digest that lactose, we have it because mother's milk has lactose. But after 18 months, very few people have persistence of that enzyme to digest lactose, and therefore whenever you consume lactose, it causes inflammation. It's not You don't sort of see it or feel it, or there's no visible manifestation in the short term, but longer term, this is a challenge. Now, there are populations in Scandinavia which have actually developed the gene to keep digesting lactose throughout their lives. There is also a tribe in Ethiopia which has done the same thing. But 91% of human beings cannot do it. Okay? 91% of human beings can't do it. So you consume dairy beyond 18 months, you start having a problem. Right? But my mother always told me this is the healthiest possible thing. Because her mother told her that. Right? And the key is, again, from an evolutionary perspective, omnivores is something that we can handle, and we can handle because of our microbiome, and I'll come to that. But in short things, it's something that we can cope with, but it is not something we are optimized for. And if we are trying to live the kind of lifespans we are trying to live, then you can't be on a diet which you can cope with. Okay? And processed foods is the biggest issue. I mean, our digestive systems and all are just simply not evolved to deal with this. And one other thing which I would sort of suggest is that a lot of us use supplements because we think they're healthy. Most supplements actually harm you far more than they are good for you. And as a general rule, if you are actually short of something and your doctor prescribes you something to supplement, you should never be supplementing for more than 6 weeks. There is one exception I will make, and that is B12. We always, as a species, got our B12 from water, from flowing water. But what we do to the water before we consume it, chlorinate it, boil it, through the RO, all the bacteria which makes the B12 all die. So we get no B12 in our diets. If you eat a non-veg diet, not farm-raised, but wild-caught stuff, you will get enough B12. But that has 20 other issues which I discussed. And if you eat a whole food plant-based diet, you either remove or significantly reduce the risk of all of these diseases. These are also, by the way, our 15 largest killers as a species. Okay. To me, what is interesting is the fact that I first found this data, and then I kept asking myself why. So what you saw in the presentation before is actually an explanation as to why. Okay. We'll stop here, maybe for a break. Okay. All right. But we'll stop here, take Q&A now from this section before we move to.
It's a little complicated to get mics, so you have to just stand up and speak loudly. Alex, you just stand up and speak loudly.
One is, you spoke about the benefits of fasting or not having food over prolonged periods of time. So, if I were to do that on a daily basis through what is popularly called as intermittent fasting, could you shed some light on the benefits?
So there is a lot of data on this. There's a gentleman called Dr. Walter Longo who's probably done the most research on this. So very unambiguously, 12 to 14 hours of intermittent fasting, unambiguously good for every single person, no question about it.
Right.
If you go beyond that, there are pluses and minuses. But up to 14 hours if you do, you're perfectly good and it is good for you.
Wonderful.
No ambiguity about it.
It also helps eradication of these, or reduces the possibility of getting one of these diseases or in some
It
combination.
would, but if you are dealing with things like cancer, etc., that intermittent fasting itself will not do the trick.
No, but right. Will it help prevent cancer? Not starting it after you get cancer, I get it. But
so here's the answer I'll give you. If you look at the population data, Muslim countries tend to have much lower
yes.
rates of cancer because they're follows
fasting
Ramzan.
during Ramzan, yes.
Right?
There was a Japanese researcher who had done a lot of research on this and concluded that because the Muslim population fasts during Ramzan, significantly lower incidence of cancer.
Yeah. But by the way, how many of you suffer from blood pressure here? If you can, do the Walter Longo fasting mimicking diet, which is basically you starve for 5 days. You eat only steamed broccoli and have green tea for 5 days. After that, you take your blood pressure.
If you survive that long.
Sorry? I've done it. I've done it.
too, yeah.
The first 1.5 days are brutal. After that, you don't notice.
You get X. Sorry, one more question on lactose milk. The human body's intolerance to lactose. So, what are the best sources of calcium? Is it a myth that you don't need milk for that high dosage of calcium, and there are no other sources that can give you an equivalent?
You know why you become calcium deficient? That's an absorption related issue. It's a different thing. But do you know why you become deficient in calcium? Because when you consume animal foods, right, the nutrients under this thing which is released are very acidic into your bloodstream. To neutralize the pH, the body will take your pH back to about 6.3 no matter what. If it varies significantly, you'll die. Where do they get calcium from? They leach it from your bones. Your body leaches it from its bones to neutralize the impact of that animal food. And which is why you're always running around saying calcium deficit, calcium deficit. By the way, there is this whole industry which is around this whole thing of, your bone density. People having fractures and all this. And I'm sorry to say, but this is one more of those big medical scams. 95% of hip fractures, that happen because of sarcopenia. You've lost muscle mass. 95% is not because you've lost bone density. Right? But to build muscle mass, you have to exercise. How does the medical profession make money out of it? I mean, so they keep stressing that 5% causality and not talking about the 95% causality.
Okay, Rahul, Juzar Bhai and then Biren.
Yeah. You said plant protein generally does not cause cancer.
It does not.
So I want to know what is the essential difference, because they all break down into amino acids. The difference between plant protein and animal protein. And secondly, when you are born, and when animals are also born, they take the mother's milk, which is dairy.
Yeah.
So when nature provides you with milk when you start your journey, why is dairy in question?
Why is it bad? I just said, right? There's an enzyme which you can use, but I have a more interesting counter question to you and to everybody in the audience. Which animals in this, which mammal I should say, because we feed our young, has the lowest protein content in its milk? Human beings. Mother's milk has the lowest protein content of any animal. Lowest. Now, you will agree that the baby is growing the fastest at that point in time. As a percentage of body weight, the protein should be the highest. Has nature got it so wrong? Has evolution got it so wrong? It has fat, it has that's energy, right? It has also oligosaccharides, which can't be digested. Why? You must. That's fantastic. Mother's milk is optimized. I have absolutely no this thing with mother's milk. Mother's milk is fantastic. But I'm also saying that mother's milk contains the lowest protein of any animal. Yes?
Biren?
I know what I'm saying is very unpopular. And I know that it is very tough because I was a carnivore till 8 years ago. It's only after my heart attack that I sort of said that, you know what, and I was told that it's your genetics, and they told me I can't work and I can only work for 1 hour a day. So I had nothing else to do, so I decided that I will study. And I'll get to the bottom of these things. So it was a very hard transition for me to make. And by the way, actually I didn't find it that hard to give up fish and prawns and meats of various kinds. The hardest two things I had was cheese and eggs. It was the hardest that I found to give up. But so the most research I did was on these two things, saying like, no, it can't be harmful.
My mother was a Parsi. Parsis kind of lived...
Was a Parsi?
She passed away. So she's of Parsi descent. Parsis live longer and they only eat meat. Very few vegetables you'll find on a Parsi table. So how does that, is that something to do with the genetics from time immemorial? That's question one. And secondly, if you go to villages, they have excess of ghee and oil and everything else. I think hospitality is about how much stuff you put into it.
And people will quote the Rig Veda, no? Eat ghee.
Yes. So
right?
these two things don't kind of match everything that we're saying.
Okay. See, these are absolutely what you're saying is correct, because this is what is there in mass media all the time. You all have heard of the blue zones. You all have heard of the blue zones. One of the blue zones was in Japan. Okinawa. Right? And everywhere they'll say that Okinawa, they ate fish. Has anyone actually read the study? The Okinawans used to eat up to 10 grams of fish or these kinds of products once in 4 months. By the way, Okinawans had a fabulous track record in terms of longevity and health span. To me, the most important thing is health span, not lifespan. But they were lower with one other blue zone called the Seventh-day Adventists. The Seventh-day Adventists were strict vegans from their religious perspective. They're mostly in California, Northern California, they're there. Right? They had better life expectancy and better health than even the Okinawans. So this whole notion that, and this ghee and all this stuff, right? How many of you think that, vegetable oil, this oil is good, that oil is not good, olive oil is good? Yeah, very good. No, olive oil is fantastic, right? Extra virgin. Now, just think of one thing, right? To extract oils require presses. If you look at the manual way of extracting an oil, the energy consumption in extracting the oil is far more than the calories from the oil. Not very sustainable, right? So it's only after you have presses. When were presses invented?
150 years ago.
1890s, and then they became more sort of widespread around the world much, much later. Right? So where is this oil coming from? Where is this whole concept that, we have always historically, cooked in oil and all this stuff? This is utter rubbish. This is also a creation of marketing. Why they used to use cottonseed oil in World War I to lubricate the rifles. After World War I ended, these guys had this huge capacity for cottonseed oil but no demand. So they said you can cook your food with it, and they started marketing it, and then this whole other, this became a big thing. How many of you have heard that you can't digest flavonols and nutrients unless there's some fat there?
Take them together. 3 at
Haven't you been told this? Unless some fat is there. So I've also, I've always been told this by my parents that, you have to have fat, otherwise you can't digest the nutrients in the food. So I started going back and seeing where is this research coming from. The first time you see evidence of this research is a company called Procter & Gamble launched a product called salad dressing. That's the first time you come across this research which says that, fat is needed, otherwise the nutrients in the salad cannot be absorbed. And then lots of research came about. And if you see all the research, they had only one thing common. They were funded by Procter & Gamble.
Rahul, we have about 8 questions,
Yeah.
so we'll take them 3 at a time.
Sure.
So the first is Rajesh at Eco Mobility, Pushkar at CPP, and Amit at Digitub. So Rajesh, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi Rahul. Here.
I can see you.
Yeah. So thanks for this really thought-provoking discussion and the presentation. Obviously, you've done your research. I just wanted to share from my personal experiences. You know, like 30 years back, my dad was a believer in naturopathy. He had herpes. He went on a fast for 21 days. He didn't eat anything. He became a skeletal. But his herpes got cured. You know, without any medicine, anything. Then slowly he started, getting back into eating and, started with juices, and then slowly it took a week to get back to normal. I myself, somewhere got in my head that I'm having some heart problem like 10 years back. And I did some research, and I found about reversible, how to reverse heart disease, and there's a research done by a doctor called Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn.
He is the ultimate god as far as that is concerned. I cured myself using Caldwell Esselstyn.
So for 1.5 years, I went into that diet, which is near about a vegan diet only. And he says you don't eat anything which has a mother or a face.
It is stricter than a vegan diet because not even nuts are allowed.
So now, but because of the peer pressure and the family, because they did not believe, they thought I'd joined some kind of a cult. What am I doing? I'm actually going to die because of that. So slowly again, it came back. So it would be a good idea to do something like this with the wives, because without their buy-in, we can't do anything anyway with the spouses.
Look, I feel for you because I grew up in a Punjabi household.
My wife is a pure carnivore.
Okay? I grew up in a Punjabi household, and I grew up, most of my years were in Bengal. And I was disowned by most of my family and most of my friends, saying that you're absolutely useless. Like, we want nothing to do with you.
So a hack that I found also about supplements, which you talk about, a hack that I found was, so I do a yearly blood test, and figure out that what am I deficient in, and then I concentrate on increasing consumption of those items, through whatever herbs and vegetables.
Use the food which is rich
the
in
food,
that.
yeah.
Don't
I just
use supplements.
Yeah, so instead of using supplements, you figure out what are you deficient in, and eat more of that which has an excess of that what you're deficient in, and it really helped.
I 200% endorse your methodology. It is absolutely the right approach.
But then so there are always some contradictions, like what Biren said and what you said, that the Muslims have less of cancer, but they also have the highest consumption of red meat. So where does that? So somewhere it feels that yes, this is research, and that is also research. So which is the right research? And then we figure out that maybe everything in moderation is good enough, and just don't worry about it and carry on.
That last statement of yours I strongly disagree with, but that's a different issue.
Rahul, we'll take 2 or 3 others together.
Yes, go
Otherwise,
ahead.
we might miss
Go
them out. Pushkar, go ahead.
Hi. So my question was...
Caldwell Esselstyn.
Go ahead, Pushkar, please.
CALD.
Can you put the
You
link?
don't even need to do that. There's a talk by him for an hour. If you just follow what is in that talk 1 hour, you don't even need to read his book. It will reverse all heart disease. Yeah. So when Clinton was told that please go home and die, that we can do nothing for you, he went to Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and now he's hale and hearty and this thing again. Caldwell Esselstyn, just for those of you who know, in case you all are thinking he's some kind of quack, he was retired as the head of surgery in Cleveland Clinic in the US. He's also, by the way, an Olympic gold medalist in his youth in rowing, but so quite a remarkable kind of guy. And he retired as head of surgery, and his biggest angst was, he said that there are people that I have done multiple bypasses for, but I'm not curing the disease because 10 years later they're back on my table. Right? And I'm doing more bypasses for them. So he's saying that, there has to be another thing. So he started experimenting with only those patients which Cleveland Clinic said, sorry, all that we know in modern science is done. Now please go home and die peacefully because we can do nothing for you anymore. He only took on those patients. Right? The Cleveland Clinic was discharging saying, hands up. And out of those patients, he did a 20-year study. He took 200 patients. And by the way, the youngest of those patients was in the 60s. It's not that he was taking patients in the 20s and 30s and pulling some scam. And 20 years later, 199 out of 200 were not only alive and kicking, but also healthy. And that one person who passed away, his wife issued a statement saying he would often cheat on Dr. Esselstein's diet.
Okay. Pushkar, Amit, go ahead.
Hi. My question was a little bit nuanced around the various types of cancer, right? So there is clearly today maybe 10 or 15 different cancers that are prevalent and cause death. And so what we're speaking about from a diet perspective, is that applicable across the spectrum? That is part one. Part two of the question is relating to being active and exercising and other things. And how does that impact to reverse some of the impacts of what might cause by the...
That's next section. So you're just preempting.
Okay.
Amit?
Yeah. So, two questions. Basically, the same question about the latest in evolution on the milk has become, digestive to human beings just 10,000 years ago. And then the blood group type, B positive. I'm sure most of us over here are B positive blood group. And it's very concentrated on the North India, China, Mongolia area. So, and of course, there is a reason why there is evolution of B positive.
Have you read that book, Eat Right for Your Blood Type? I'm sorry, it's completely specious. There's no science. I mean, it's misleading.
Not exactly that, but I've read other studies around, how testosterone are working when at high altitude, etc., etc. I also believe in evolution. I actually buy into whatever you have presented. I myself, like for instance, I don't drink milk and exercise a lot. I'm an opening batsman. And so on. So I do believe in and go against my mother because she's making ghee with her own hands and I don't eat it. So the social issues and so on. So I do believe all I'm saying. Just these two things that intrigue me.
We'll take them together. Sudhir?
Yeah. Rahul, fantastic.
ThoughtWorks, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic talk. I think post-COVID, I've been dabbling with a lot of this, but I think your knowledge is just at a different level. So thanks for that. Just a couple of things. One is, I think as you highlighted, we just seem to be living in this world of lies right now. A combination of what medical science we are getting fed, what journalism is doing on the back of it.
I promise you one thing, and I'm going to interrupt you. Doctors are not misleading you intentionally.
Right. And I get that because I've had a lot of discussions. That's what they're taught right now in medical schools.
No, they're not taught this subject at all. Their
So
learning
they're taught to
on these
treat
subjects
diseases
is from the media, just like you and me.
Right. So my question is, so West I think is highly corrupted on this. What's the path forward for India? We just seem to be following a lot what is there in the West, more processed food. We're just getting into that, and then India's soon going to be the capital of all of these diseases. So that's one question. Second, any views on the impact of vaccines? Because with RFK now in the US, he has the stats of when he was young, they took 6 vaccines, now they're taking 89. And a lot of diseases, the metabolic diseases have actually gone up. So any thoughts on that? And the last one is, I've just gone, as you mentioned, the point of cancer touching, I think most of us in some form. A lot of my friends who have shifted to the US, a lot of them have suffered from cancer at some point at my age group. So is that a locational change or is that just linked to the diet?
Lifestyle.
Lifestyle and diet?
Because your society is geared to you optimize to another kind of lifestyle, no, socially. It's very tough to,
So is that the mutation or is it just...
No, there's no mutation at all. They've
Ra-
seen immigrants which have migrated from countries which have no metabolic diseases to America, and within one generation they're getting all those diseases. So it's not the genes.
Rahul, the other two we'll take together with
Yeah.
Isuzu Rajesh's question, and then we can we should move on to the next section,
Okay.
and then close in 10 minutes for coffee. Rajesh, go ahead, please. No, go ahead.
See, thanks for your thought-provoking presentation. And I have one challenge we have in today's world with so much of impurities. Getting whole food, plant, and vegetables and plants of right quality. It has so much of chemicals and all kind of problems. So I have known a doctor friend.
That's next section we'll cover.
It will cover in the next section. Second, I have a doctor who's helping me in Chennai. She's always tells me not to read any of the medias or doctors on social media, but it has improved my wellness with her. But she gives one argument that some supplements are useful because they are much cheaper source of supplementing than by the natural sources. They are very expensive. To get same amount of supplement, then eating a supplement is a much better source. So what is your take on that?
Can I answer his
Yes, now,
first?
and you also answer the vaccine and the India path.
Okay. See, understand why supplements are harmful. And there are studies which show that those who supplement regularly, and by the way, those who supplement regularly are very health conscious. They're usually fitter, they're far more sort of, they want to be healthy. Right? The reason they consume supplements is they want to be healthier. That's the population set. Their life expectancy is shorter than those who don't consume supplements. Now, why is this the case? And I'll give you a very simple example. How many of you are told that, if you have got a cold or something, eat vitamin C? People will use 2 grams of vitamin C, etc. What happens is our body is optimized for a lot of the flavonols, etc. that it captures. It is optimized to share what's called transporters within the body. What picks up from the gut and takes it to its relevant place, you share transporters. And what happens in a natural food, you don't get one flavanol or one phytonutrient, you get 1,000 or 2,000. Right? But what you do is that you clog that transporter with one thing. And as a consequence, what happens is the body is deprived of 1,999 other things. That thing will be okay. Because we have not actually mapped all of the phytonutrients. We have not even, modern science has not even mapped it. Right? So, it's similar to say that, there are a lot of, in the West, they push these curcumin supplements. Right? There's study after study after study which says, eat the haldi. It's far healthier, far more beneficial than just eating the curcumin. Why? That haldi or that turmeric has over 200 known, researched, established flavanols which are beneficial to you. There may be a lot more. These are only what has been studied so far. You're taking out one of them and saying, push this, but then when I sell the pill, I can make a lot of money. If I stand here and tell you that please eat turmeric, who's going to make money out of it? See, one of the biggest distortions which is happening is because the incentives are not there to tell you what I'm telling you. As far as vaccines are concerned, look, I think the US is guilty of pushing a lot more vaccines than are required, but there are some kinds of vaccines I think are very beneficial. Those TABC, etc. things as in childhood that we get at our age. If you've had chicken pox, then taking the shingles vaccine. I think these are things that you must do, right? But this 86 vaccines and all is like a serious overkill. I mean, it's not necessary, it's not needed. I think there there are a lot of conspiracy theories saying that, Mr. Gates has got large investments in these vaccine companies, and his Gates Foundation keeps pushing. I think it's a little unfair. I think they're doing a good job generally. But what happens is that, if you want a certain clinical outcome, right, then scientists know how to get you that outcome. And one of the biggest issues, I was the chairman of a pharma R&D company for many years, and it used to grate me at times when I used to see that research which said a thing which was inconvenient, you don't publish it. But you do that same study the third time and it gives you research that outcome that you want, you publish that. Is that the full truth? You're misleading everybody, no? But I'm saying this is the way the modern world works today, right?
Rahul, in this section there were 2 or 3 other questions, but we've urged them to ask later.
Okay.
So if you're not going to be offended, we might come back
All right.
to some of the
That's
issues
fine.
here. So we have to break in another 5 to 7 minutes. Would you like to continue on to the next section?
All right.
And then we
I can?
take a few charts and
Yeah.
then break before Q&A.
Okay. So since I'm intent on disturbing everybody's core beliefs and core notions, I'm going to continue. But before I get into this, I was asked about ghee, and let me respond to that. And I've often heard this argument, it's there in the Rig Veda. The problem that we have in today's society is that we are used to reading that 3-line summary. Nobody goes back to the original text and reads it. Since I had a misspent youth, I've read a lot of things which I shouldn't have because I was doing everything except what I should have been doing. But the Rig Veda says you should consume ghee in ceremonies of great stature, etc. Like, there's one which is supposed to be held every 14 years. Please consume ghee every 14 years, like the Rig Veda says. But don't quote the Rig Veda and say I should eat ghee every day. Because that's not what the Rig Veda says. Right? The Rig Veda also, by the way, I don't want to offend anybody, but you can go and read the Rig Veda yourself, also says eat beef. But once in 14 years. Now, we interpret what we want, how we want, as per our convenience. But the reality is that the science is very clear. We've come from prosimians, we've come from apes, right? We are optimized to be herbivores. I'll come back. There is an entire section on microbiome, which is there in the 3rd section, in modern life, and then I'll explain why sometimes we can get away being omnivores and sometimes we can get away with this thing. But let me get on with my agenda of disturbing our popularly held notions and what we believe is true. And I know that this will be even more unpopular than the previous section. So I'm prepared for the brickbats that I receive. Mating patterns. How did we actually evolve? Was this pair bonding something which is there? Is this always, are we simply a pair bonded species? We operated in small tribes. What is very interesting that roughly 40% of those small tribes were related to each other. There were groups of 30, 40 individuals. You know how recent a species we are. If we trace our DNA back, everyone goes back only 150,000 years. But if I don't want to trace it to only one person, and I'm happy to trace it to up to 2,000 people, 65,000 years ago, I can trace every single person's lineage in this room back to less than 2,000 people. So we are a very small species. We are a very small species. Right? I didn't cover one thing, I forgot that, but that's extremely important. Should I do that before I start this?
Perhaps you should.
Okay. So this whole thing of fire, right? I told you that as a species we are so young. How did we sort of, develop this whole thing of fire and cooking food? Do you know any other animal in the world who cooks its food? We are the only ones, right? Now, did the prefrontal cortex make us go down that route? Or is it because we started cooking that the prefrontal cortex could... I have not been able to answer this question for myself. But I do know one thing. You keep reading about ancient man controlling fire, being able to light fire, using flint stones, etc. How many of you have gone camping in your lives here, in your childhood? How many of you can tell me genuinely, truthfully, heart on hand, or hand on heart, and say you were able to light a fire using caveman tactics, fully knowing exactly what you're supposed to do, having the right substance? Can anyone tell me? I have tried and tried and tried and tried as a child. I could never do it. I have been on campsites where suddenly the fire would appear, and then I started watching carefully. Always the camp leader would, one quiet lighter would happen and one fire would happen. Right? So this whole thing that, with stones they could do this and all this stuff, I find this whole argument extremely specious. You all are highly educated people in this room. You know exactly what is required to start the fire, the aeration process, this thing. I challenge all of you. Light a fire using these roots and show me. Yeah. How? Which flints? Which flints? Yeah. Those flints, they have that special flint. So what is very interesting, okay, is that if you look at all the genetic data, it suggests that humans evolved near the Rift Valley. Now you suddenly juxtapose that with the geological data. That entire area was live with volcanoes there. And those volcanoes were spewing lava for 30, 40,000 years. Okay? Just like, and the lava flows are very similar to what's in Hawaii. Very, very similar. My guess, okay, this is my guess, is that human beings learned how to control and use fire using that lava. That slow lava at those temperatures, they were able to light fires, and therefore they took to cooking. When they took to cooking, what does cooking do? It cuts down your metabolic load. So your extraction of calories from food goes up significantly because your work done in digesting it comes down significantly. So you develop a lot more energy. Right? And I think that is what enabled our prefrontal cortex to grow. These are my guesses, okay? There is no way that I can prove that I'm right or anyone can prove that I'm wrong. But I did look up the geological data because this was something which really troubled me. Right? That how, now after you have a prefrontal cortex, you know that, you know a process, you know the causality, you understand the causality, then being able to transport fire and having certain percentage and being able to do it under certain natural conditions when it was not raining, not wet, etc., meant that we could cook our food sometimes. And that actually gave us a lot more energy, but it also means to me that we were eating a combination of raw foods and cooked foods, which in our modern lifestyles we have completely forsaken. Right? And that I think is where we are optimally optimized for evolutionarily.
I was wondering if it's okay, we'll take a coffee break because I realized that many of you would have asked for coffee inside, but you can see the logistical nightmare. All that he has to do is trip and we'll have a disaster. So we'll have a coffee break here, reassemble, and there are other parts to this. And consequently, the pace now will be a little faster, so you will have to bear with us. We will try and take a few questions towards the end. But but I wanted Rahul to go through the entire
Just clear
presentation.
Clear everything from this.
So, please
Just
start.
leave this, clear everything else. Clear that. I endeavor to shake up commonly held beliefs, right? This whole thing of, is this marriage and monogamy, is this how we've evolved? Is this what our biology is? Is this what our ancestors did? Well, the reality is that we lived in small tribes, and actually they were like little communes, and there was a lot of cross-mating going on. Now, if you think of this from a evolutionary perspective, right, you are optimized to making sure that your DNA has the best chance of survival. How do you ensure that your DNA has the best chance of survival? By making sure that you actually partner your DNA with some different people's DNA. So there is more diversity, so that in different environmental conditions and different situations, the chances of your DNA surviving are higher. Okay? And that's exactly how we evolved. As a species, that's how we evolved. And in ancient civilizations, you had polygamy, you had concubines, you had marriages. All of these things were there. And early romantic love in culture was there, but very it was kind of, I would say, sporadic rather than something which was the norm or the regular thing. And the modern era, you've had monogamy and romantic love and, these kinds of things which are newer notions. And I will argue that all of this is not what our biology is optimized for, but what our social architecture is optimized for a different reason altogether. Right? Are there benefits to marriages? There are benefits, right? Because we are a species where the young, if you think of it again from an evolutionary perspective, it takes almost 6-7 years to become viable. That entity can run around by itself, can forage by itself. Right? So, having two people looking after the child is something which is important. By the way, humans are actually designed to be more than two people looking after, because there are various kinship related, and I will not say culture, but more biology, which encourages kinship. Which means that a child was typically looked after not just by mother and father, but typically that whole tribe. And so if you all want to know how that biology works, we all have something in our immune systems. Our immune systems are actually governed by something called the major histocompatibility complex, or the MHC, you'll see in academic literature. This MHC, amongst other things, also determines the pheromones that you all produce. And we have the ability to determine whether somebody's pheromone is similar to ours, therefore the MHC is similar to ours, therefore whether they are kin or not. Right? So, our biology determines the fact that that whole ecosystem would look after the child. It was not an isolated endeavor. Established paternity. Now, when did this established paternity and this pair bonding kind of start? This actually happened after the agricultural revolution. When people were, farming their own this thing. Now, the problem is that I think from a men's perspective, for women, they never wanted this. But from a men's perspective, the view was that we should have, if we are investing our resources on the upbringing of this child, we want to be sure of paternity. Right? Therefore, this whole thing of trying to guard the woman, etc. From a society's perspective, it's very interesting. If you look at most of our chimpanzee cousins or bonobo cousins or those kinds of things, what happens in a lot of the apes and a lot of the primates, the alpha or the top echelon these things get mating rights and others don't. And the ones who are excluded from the mating this thing, inevitably, and by the way, this is not human beings, they resort to things like rape, coercive violence to promote mating, etc. You see this in human beings too. The person who has no chance of getting a mate, you will see this kind of behavior. So I think those organizing society thought that if we push monogamy, then everyone will have a mate, so therefore this behavior will get. It makes sense from managing a social architecture, but it is actually at odds with our biology and our evolutionary imperative. And also economic specialization was possible, right? Because if you looked at it historically, what happened is that pretty much you learnt the profession of your father or your parent, and therefore you kept doing that. Whereas in a in a marriage, you suddenly broadened it to two. If your mother had some other skill, you could learn one of those. So these are benefits of evolving into this kind of societal architecture, I will call it. Right? But the challenges of modern marriage in today's world is what? Suddenly, women are getting educated, they're becoming economically, they're able to generate adequate amount of resources themselves. And when they can generate adequate resources themselves, what is the need for a mate? And why one mate? Right? Parental certainty, today you can do DNA tests and you can know exactly who's the father, who's not, and who will contribute and who won't. So this is not a thing that I need to put somebody in a parda and keep them locked up and keep them away because I don't know whether the child will be mine or not. You can know very easily. And in terms of organized societies, today you have law and order, you have police, you have safety norms, these kinds of things. In poorer countries like ours, we still go back to the animalistic kingdom where, because the law implementation, execution is not that great. But generally, in better organized societies, and those of us who are better off can usually make law and order work for us, right? There is also this entire formal educational institution, skill building. Now, your progeny can acquire different skills through these formalized education sort of institutions, whereas earlier they could only learn from their parents. Right? So this sudden imperative for the modern marriage is kind of this thing. But I think also the biggest challenge today is a little even more basic. See, historically, even when you went from that commune kind of living into agrarian living and monogamy, the husband and wife stimuli, social stimuli, environmental stimuli, all was coherent. It was the same. They all were exposed to the same set of things all the time, right? So therefore, they typically evolved in a very similar fashion. Today, what is the situation? I see this everywhere all the time. A couple might be sitting together on the dining table, both will be on different social medias, both will be exposed to totally different stimuli. Within a month, they would have cumulatively more differentiated stimuli than 100 years ago what people had in their lifetimes. Okay? Now, what happens is then, therefore, you're evolving in different pathways. And this creates a big challenge in terms of, so there is this big, now when your reason, your organizational reason or your social reason for a particular architecture is becoming weaker, the chances are that your biology will again prevail at some point in the ecosystem. Sorry, before this slide, I think what's very interesting is that through this pair bonding kind of situation, right, you would expect that the same father would be actually fathering the children historically. And this is what all the sociologists believe that this was true. But now, sadly, now you have something called DNA data. And what does the DNA data say? the DNA data says that even in pair bonded situations, usually at least 40% of the offspring were not from the partner. Okay. Now here is the scary bit. In Europe, there was a study done after the advent of contraception. Okay, contraception freely available, DNA tests available. What is the ratio of offsprings which are not from your pair bonding partner? In different regions it varied, but it varied between 10 and 40%. Which means, even if someone's having an affair, they can easily, make sure that at least the kids are not from that affair partner. But they're still choosing to have that, DNA diversification. Biology is ruling. Even today, right? And if you start weakening the grounds for that social architecture which has existed, then biology will come back in a big way. And it's very interesting that we all have been teenagers, right? You meet somebody of the opposite sex, you get excited, it's all, you get a dopamine high, the serotonin rushes. It's a major feeling of elation. You know what is strange about our biochemistry? That the dopamine high we get from the anticipation is far more than the high we get from the actual relationship. Okay. In the words of Robert Sapolsky, who I think is one of the most brilliant people on this planet, he said, relationships is the price you pay for the anticipation of it. Now, please look at this. When you get a new relationship, in the first year, look at the spike you get in oxytocin, serotonin, your feel good, your dopamine, etc. It is phenomenal. And then it starts, by 2 years, it starts to level off. Just 2 years. We've always talked about the 7-year itch and this and that. It continues up to 7 years. And then these actually decline even further. What builds up in a pair bonding things is trust and safety. All the biological markers of trust, safety, comfort, those build up. But this excitement, this happiness, this euphoria disappears. Why is our biology made like this? Your biology is pushing you, right? That find your next mate. Diversify your gene pool. What was interesting was in Switzerland, in the university, they had this study where they asked young ladies to find out who they found most attractive. On the basis of what? They made them smell the t-shirts of young men who'd worn it and worked out. They didn't know who the people were just from the smell of the t-shirt. I don't know why anyone would want to smell, sweat of a t-shirt, but it was what it was, right? What was very interesting was the women picked the t-shirt of the man who had the most different immune system genes than they did. I don't want to use the technical jargon here, but the most diversified immune system genes was what they found the most attractive. Now think of this from an evolutionary perspective, right? The chances that that child would be able to resist that many more diseases, and therefore the chances of your DNA surviving go up very significantly. Right? I don't know, MHC is the major histocompatibility complex, but think of it just basically as your immune system archetype. By the way, as human beings, the most diversification we have right, is off our this thing. It's in the, what they call the HLA protein, human leukocytic antigen. It's that which is most diversified. So the same disease, right, some infectious disease hits everybody in the room, some 20% will not be able to handle it, the others will. You get another infection, that 20% may be able to handle that, some other 20% won't. So as a species, this diversification is important. Right? The only thing I will caution is that this study is not being replicated, so I don't know whether, how valid it is, but this is what it is. There are other studies which suggest that your most optimal mate, for multiple reasons, is your 8th cousin. 8th cousin. Okay. I don't want to get into the biology and the science of that, but that's 8th cousin. Not 8 cousins. So if you look at, people who lived like probably the way our ancestors lived, the Himba community, etc., where they use pair bonding. But when they do the DNA mapping of the children, by the way, now they have contraception easily available. The number of their children from people not from their pair bonded partner is 48%. Okay? And this is in spite of the fact that contraception is given to them free by government. And what was even more interesting was that most couples always had at least one child from a different parent. And what's very interesting is that what do our closest relatives, chimps and bonobos, do? I mentioned to you, chimps' DNA is only 1.5% different from ours. Right? Which is not much, because the difference between people in this room will be 0.9%. So 1.5% is not much. Chimps have the architecture where the alpha males get all of the mating rights and the others get left out. What are bonobos? Bonobos, basically, their philosophy is have sex with everyone all the time, diversify your gene pool as much as possible. Right? These are our closest in terms of our DNA in nature. I'm glad the spouses are not in the room. Sorry? Some of them are. Okay. Paradox of choice. One of the very strange things you notice, and since I teach in university over weekends, I notice this phenomenon. Is in today's world, see, historically, your mating partner pool was, you're in bands of 50, 60, your mating partner pool was 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? Today, in the modern era, your dating partner pool is infinite. And then people make lists, I want this. So will they settle? Because there could always be someone else who meets this. So therefore, what they resort to is saying that, all right, I don't want to settle, but I want that, that dopamine and serotonin high, and I want those endorphins kicking into my system. So let me have a series of short-term relationships. So your commitments also reduce. And as women are becoming economically more empowered, this is even changing more. Right? And there's also this entire concept of delayed reproduction. Why are you delaying reproduction? Because I can get an even better mate. What about conflict? Let's move away from marriage. Let's deal with easier subjects. Sorry? What's the difference? So here I'm now talking tribal conflicts. I'm not talking individual conflicts. Huh? So there earlier used to be violent conflicts, there was this dominance issue, right? All these kinds of things which are there. But what has happened is that how did you actually mitigate this? Through social contracts of various natures, right? And what's very interesting is that how many of you are into marketing here? So all the people in marketing will all know Cialdini's 7 principles, right? Of influence and persuasion, reciprocity, your social proof, authority, respecting authority figures, one of us, unity or kinship, right? And if you look at all of his 7 principles which are there, if you really think about it, you can trace it back to your biology and your evolution. Every one of them. They were all required to survive. Right? Consistency and commitment. You needed your tribe to think that you're authentic and believable and you were, otherwise they would just abandon you. So if you think of all of those principles, they actually come all from biology. Right? Today what we've done is that after all these, these physical fights, etc., now technology has reached a point where we are pretty assured that we can all wipe each other out. So in our self-interest, right, we stop fighting. I mean, we had how many wars with Pakistan? After you've got nuclear weapons, we'll flex our muscles and, make some noise, give some bombastic speeches, and you'll have some sort of friction in the border, but right? What about older societies which don't have this assured self-destruction? They still kill each other. You look at the African conflicts, they're very different. But I think what's very interesting in conflict also is the fact that there were studies done where, and this is you're biologically hardwired through your limbic system, not your prefrontal cortex, that if you come across somebody who's very different from you in looks, appearance, habits, this, that, you immediately feel threatened. There's a threat perception. So the chances of violence towards someone who's very different from you are significantly higher than someone who broadly looks like you, behaves like you. So they did a very interesting experiment in American jails where they started using software, they started using mirroring. People who have committed violence, they started using mirrors to make them look, their mirror image, what they thought they were getting, looked more and more the features they were like of different people. And when they started feeling that they themselves looked like that, their violent tendencies completely died away. So this is again a sort of, this is a very prehistoric, your animal instinct where this violence comes from. It's not... I think the other thing which has happened, right, about conflicts in the modern world, at least today, is the fact that really your conflicts is not that much about land. Earlier, wealth was always related to fertile land in some form or fashion, right? Or it was to loot. But now it's not that. Now you want ideas. Now you want technology. Now you want dependable supply chains. So therefore the nature of war has changed a lot. There are wars being fought every day, right? And you have cybersecurity coming in and those kinds of things, but that's where the biggest fight is. China has been at war with the US for a long time. I don't know how many of you have read a book called The 100-Year Marathon. It's a short book. I recommend it. Their belief in China was that, look, we have historically always been the middle kingdom. What is the middle kingdom? There is heaven, there is earth, and we are the middle kingdom. Right? We have always been the middle kingdom. These guys have messed us up just now, the last 100 odd years. We will make a plan so that we can again become the middle kingdom. And everyone else should pay suzerainty to us. So they said, how do we do it? And they said, we must get all the technologies of all these guys because that's how they defeated us. So how do we make a plan to do this? And they made what they call a 100-year plan. They are way ahead of schedule. Sorry? Yeah, they're about 20 years ahead of schedule at this moment. Right? So it's not that wars are not being fought. It's not that we are not competing for resources, which is what the whole game was about even in the past. Right? It's not that, wherever there is potential scarcity, we don't try and grab it. But the way we fight is different. So the way we have conflicts has evolved. And like I was saying, the evolution of trust. Right? The first sign of civilization is the sign of a healed femur. I mean, if you have a broken bone in the wild, you're dead. Some predator will get you. If you have time for it to heal, which means that there is actually some civilization, there's that reciprocity is ruling. Right? And strangely, the first signs of these healed bones are not that old. And trust and kinship and altruism. So what's very interesting is that kinship was there, but reciprocal altruism, even without kins, again was very important for the human development. So if you didn't have this, you didn't survive. So this has again come something from the evolutionary pathway. Right? And language is a catalyst of trust. So how did language develop? Why is it that we have such complex language and no other species does? Where did this develop from? So if you see our great apes and our ape cousins in various ways, they also communicate. How do they communicate? Usually through gestures. Right? There is a sort of, the scientific community calls the area of the brain, which they say monkey see, monkey do, where they can copy gestures and sort of indicate things to each other. And what is very, very interesting is that is the area, the gestures part of it, is where we have had language develop from. That part of our brain has evolved into, and when did this happen? When can you do gestures? When you're not on fours. You've become two-legged. Now your hands are free to do gestures. And then from those gestures you evolved into your mouth being able to do it because now your hands are also free. So that's the sort of evolutionary pathway which has happened. And that's one of the most unique things about us, that we can communicate and therefore we can collaborate, and we can collaborate in large numbers. It's not that other species don't collaborate. Orcas or killer whales collaborate. Dolphins collaborate. Smell is a kinship. It's an identification of who's mine, who's not. But I want to fight these guys in this manner, right? Strategy. A lot of that you need language for. And as language developed, that's wolves collaborate. If you see the architecture of wolves as to how they move, right? They collaborate. And this whole thing of notion of, from an evolutionary perspective, that people sacrifice themselves for the good of the species. Actually, in biology, that's completely not true. So you will see that, when zebras, etc., are trying to cross a river and there are crocodiles there, right? You'll see them all gathering on but not jumping into the river. And suddenly you'll see one of the oldest and the most feeble of them jumps into the river and he gets eaten up. And I saw a lot of sociologist commentary saying that this guy sacrificed himself so the rest of the herd could. But if you see those videos in slow motion and you see the guy got pushed. He didn't sacrifice himself. Huh? So this notion that people sacrifice themselves for the good of the species is not true. But people sacrifice themselves for their DNA to survive. A mother will sacrifice herself for her child to survive, but not for the species to survive. Right? Would you sacrifice yourself for two siblings? Not one, but two? Yes. There's a decent chance. Would you sacrifice yourself for your cousins? You'll need 8 of them. Right? Because it's basically your DNA which you are reprogrammed to help. And a lot of the other kind of self-sacrifice that you see in war and heroes and all that, that is pure social brainwashing and conditioning. That's not where your biology is driving you. Okay. And enabling conveyance, the groundwork for stronger nuanced relationships, so we can have different kinds of relationships, which, not there in animal kingdom that much. And the formal institutionalized trust networks, Contract Act is a trust network, right? There's a framework. So the more you enhance these things, the more collaboration, the more any society progresses. What about religion? I know I'm treading on very dangerous ground here. So that's God and man. And what are they both saying? Finally, I meet my maker. I'm only going to one thing that I'm saying, organized religion as we know it, right, has been used by those trying to organize society. And if you look at every religion, you look at what it did was to codify what was accepted morality and social architecture at that point in time. It was like a mirror. It was a reflection of what the society was, right? If you see most religions, the religion will preach that, you have morality and you have all this because we are telling you. The reality is the opposite. It was because that is what society believed. They actually mirrored it at that point in time. Right? Now, it's an adaptive process. It's also to engender group loyalty. This is actually a take on tribal instinct. Do you see tribal instinct being core to us? Right? How many of you support sports teams? This is our sports team, right? It's a tribal instinct ultimately. This is my club. This is my IPL franchise who I belong to. These are all manifestations of that same tribal instinct coming out in some form or fashion. And your religious morality is a social regulator, right? Don't do this because, often if you look, today of course you have cameras everywhere and everyone knows everything that you do. And if they don't, within half an hour they can find out. I can guarantee you that. But what's very interesting is that historically, how did you enforce the law? You needed this higher body saying that, if you do this, God will be upset. Right? I am king, you have to respect my right to be king because I have a divine right. So if you do anything to me, you will be punished by a higher figure. Right? So this is how this has evolved. I'm not saying that there is God or there isn't God or there's a creation, because one of the basic questions of metaphysics no one's been able to answer. Why is everything there? Where did it come from? No one is able to answer it, not even any organized religion. Where did we come from? And if God is there, what is God? Right? You have scientific explanations like, people like Spinoza and maybe I think the Hansa school of Vedanta, they have tried to address these kinds of issues, but if you look, for the most part, most religions don't even address these kinds of things. They sort of obfuscate it in some form or fashion. And the hallmark is very clear that it is germane to that ecosystem, what was moral, what was this thing that has been codified in different ways. Okay? Higher sanction authority controlled, and most of these religions then control sexual activity. Why? This is what I said, because our primal instinct is that women move towards mates where they think that their gene pool biologically has the highest chance of survival. So the lowest of the species get excluded and they commit violence. So suddenly you wanted to have an architecture where you try to reduce that, right? And again, there is definitely comfort in alleviating crisis and death and things which are outside your control. So anything outside your control, you can sort of put that in a box and say that, as God wills it, right? Because many times if we have this instinct of saying that it must be for a better good, right? I mean, whatever has happened, again, these are things that you need to reconcile too. Now, what's very interesting is that we are the only species on this earth who are actually conscious of mortality. We are conscious of the fact that we'll die. No other species is even aware of this. We are the only ones, right? So again, I think we need some assuaging. I think a prefrontal cortex has got ahead of itself at some level, right? So you need God. What is also very interesting is that if you see chanting and prayers, and all religions have some kind of prayers and chanting and this and that, all religions. If you see your brain activity after you've done that for half an hour or something, or you go through a prayer session, it actually calms the brain. Right? If you do it for an extended period of time, and there have been experiments that suggest that if you chant for like 2 hours or something like that, the same state that if you used opioids, your brain activity starts reflecting that. So there was a very interesting scientific experiment which was done to say that, all right, all the religions claim this in their favor. What happens if we make people chant something inane? For 2 hours, same result. Same result. So actually this chanting, and especially group chanting, is seen to be very calming. So those of you who are very stressed out, I recommend visit your friendly neighborhood religious institution. It will actually calm you down. What about governments? How did governments arrive? Where have they come from? You know how governments evolved initially? You throw a bunch of people in the wild together and see what happens. Now some hierarchy gets developed, a government gets developed. You know what it is? It's a protection racket. It's basically a protection racket. Only I will commit violence. I am the strongest over here. And as long as you adhere to me, I will make sure that no one else commits violence against you. And therefore, you have to share a disproportionate percentage of your resources with me. Right? After that, governments evolved to doing many other things. But this is where it evolved from. Right? And if you look at jails, large open jails, you will find this in every country in the world, the same thing developing. This protection racket kind of, architecture. And it gives you a sense of your primal instinct in terms of where this is coming from. And this centralized power, this protection, this not having this thing to worry about who's going to knife me at night, all this has the benefit of saying, okay, I'll adhere to this group or this thing. Right? Let me move quickly to, how much time, Adit? Okay. Modern lifestyle. See, it's not only food and it's not only our social architecture, which is this thing with our biology, but a lot of our modern lifestyles are also at this thing with our biology. All of you worry about overpopulation, right? Average sperm concentration of the average male on this planet in the last 50 years, down 50%. 50% it has declined. Both the ability and the desire to reproduce is going down. Why is this happening? Whatever it is, we've been around on the planet 150,000 years. This has not happened. Now, suddenly in the last 50 years, how many of you have youngsters in your office who are married who are not producing kids? It's astonishing. The key is, it is both the ability and the desire to produce kids, which has reduced significantly. And age of the first birth has risen a lot. Now, biologically, if you think about it, a woman is biologically most fertile and gets the healthiest children between probably the ages of 18 and 24. I don't know any educated woman who's having a child at this age. At best 30. Right? Yeah. Now, what is happening is that that's also okay because the risks and all that increase, but they're not exponential. After 35, it's exponential. So now you have a situation where we are having male sperm counts coming down. Now, why are male sperm counts coming down? I'm coming to that. But also female emancipation, and you've got a situation where women's desire to reproduce is also declining. So what is being messed with in terms of your biology is also your entire thought process. Your reproduction is a very basic biological imperative. The fact that it is being pushed away, something is going wrong. What is going wrong? We are dealing with a whole bunch of chemicals, etc. in our modern day-to-day lives. You know how many we are dealing with? On last count, about 62 or 63,000 chemicals we use regularly as a human species. How many have been studied for their impact on human beings and on the environment? 200. Only 200. The rest of those chemicals, we have no idea what they're doing to us, but we are happily using them. Our modern lifestyle depends on a lot of these chemicals. They're very clear that phthalates, which are, soft plasticizers and sort of used everywhere, these are harming you in multiple ways. They're messing with your hormonal system, your endocrine system, your estrogenic chemicals, your BPAs, right? Your parabens. All of these things are there in our day-to-day lives in every which way. Forget anywhere else. There are phthalates that babies have that feeding bottle, that nipple. There's lots of phthalates in that. Otherwise, how do you get that suppleness? So it is there everywhere. And they are forever chemicals, right, which are basically fluorocarbons of some nature or the other. Is there, DuPont is the one who made them, your non-stick pans, etc. We get small percentage of that in our life. And you know what? The body doesn't know what to do with it. It cannot dispose it off. And fluorocarbons are amongst the strongest bonds found in nature. You can't destroy it once it's made. And it goes inside your body. And you know where these forever chemicals are being found now? It's in your blood. It's in your liver. It's in your gut. It's in mother's milk. Is it any surprise that our reproductive efficiency has suddenly dropped dramatically in spite of all modern science? There's a wider societal thing, but the first thing we need to understand is the fact that we have a certain biology, and the more you deviate from it, please understand what you're doing and why. Most of, you get this gear like rainproof gear. Most of that gear actually completely messes your hormonal system. If you use it, how many of you use stain, you stain coat your sofas at home? Messes with your endocrine system majorly. Your shampoos, your soaps, your creams. It's a different thing that, most of the creams, however expensive they are, what they do is they bind your moisture towards your skin. So a simple plain Vaseline will do the trick, which is probably the safest thing to use in spite of all of these other things which are added in. But they sell you a fancy dream. So, use this cream, you will look very attractive and you will look beautiful or you will look handsome. Fair and handsome. And look, it's there in our food also. I'm sorry. This sexual dimorphism, etc. A lot of the herbicides, etc. that we use have these kinds of issues too. It's impacting plants. And we don't understand what we are doing. That's the most important thing. So the key is that we start needing to understand what it is that we are using. If you're introducing something new into the ecosystem, there needs to be some testing. There is none. This is one very big issue, the microbiome. The reason we have been able to develop inside the prefrontal cortex, etc., the reason with such a simple DNA we are able to do so many complex things is because of the partnership with the microbiome. If you do not have a microbiome, a baby is sanitized, does not have a microbiome, the immune system does not develop. The nervous system does not develop. If you impair the microbiome, mental development is retarded. ADHD, autism, all these kinds of things where these things have grown as a percentage of population 50, 100 times. Because we are messing with our microbiome, we don't understand it. The first and most significant issue is excessive hygiene. Where did we evolve? In forests, foraging. We were exposed to microbiome all the time. What is the first thing you and I do? Arey, kamra ko saaf karo. What do you use? You use bleach. Doesn't matter which brand you're using. At home you're using bleach to clean the house. What have you done? You have taken away all the natural microbiome that your body has evolved with. So you stunt your microbiome. You stunt it also through food. One of the key things of eating a plant-based diet is that fiber is essential for the constituent in your mix of your microbiome. One of the big issues with eating animal protein is that it changes the microbiome you have, and the new microbiome that you get produces something called trimethyl-aniline oxidase, TMAO, which causes serious heart disease and all kinds of other issues. That's actually the end product of the metabolism of animal foods in your gut. Why? Because you were never supposed to have that microbe to start with. Why does that microbe exist in your gut? Because you're eating animal foods which you have not evolved for. Now, in the short term, this is very advantageous. If I'm starving and I'm not getting any other food at some point in time, if I'm able to eat that calorie bit and I can survive, it's all right. I have an evolutionary advantage. But if I include this kind of deviation from what I'm optimized for on a regular basis, it is going to cost me. Urbanization again is a big issue. Our microbial diversity has reduced a lot. And even our plant foods that we eat are focused on such a narrow number of plants is where the biggest problem is. We are used to moving around all the time and foraging and having all different kinds of plants all the time. Antibiotic overuse kills good bacteria also. A lot of people who have mental issues, mental health issues, that have had strong antibiotics in their childhood. The microbiome has got stunted, and the science and understanding of microbiome and how to recover it is still very nascent. But it's unambiguous that if you damage your microbiome, there are a lot of health consequences which are there. And lower fiber. See, one of the other issues we have, I don't know if you all realize it, how many of you have had wisdom teeth extracted? Oh, actually, it's a fewer number than I had expected, or had a problem with wisdom teeth. So, in the last 100 odd years, our jaws have actually shrunk. Why? Because we're not chewing enough. Why are we not chewing enough? Because we're not using high enough fiber foods. Now, can you imagine from an evolutionary perspective, if you got those wisdom teeth, what would you do? That level of pain, it could kill you. Why? Because you're not chewing, so your jaw has shrunk, so there's no space for that tooth at the back of your mouth to come out. So fiber is the fuel for the microbiome. Microbiome then releases a whole bunch of chemicals which are good for you. Fermented foods, usually they have something called ILAs, which your gut bacteria changes into the most anti-inflammatory sort of, short chain fatty acids, etc. Butyrates, etc. They all come from your microbiome. They're the most anti-inflammatory things in your thing. But if you don't give them their food, they can't produce your food for you. The other thing is that if you look, all infectious diseases have come down with our sanitization, this thing. But all autoimmune diseases have shot up in the last 50 years. Again, it's not that you shouldn't have a clean environment. Please don't get this messaging wrong. It is that you should clean, your cleaning agents should be with friendly microbiome, friendly, with microbes. Natural microbes, not these chemicals that we use, which by the way also seriously damages your lungs, and you are less so because you're further away from the floor. But if you have pets at home, you have kids at home, you are permanently impairing their lungs and you're permanently giving them all kinds of health issues with our cleaning agents that we use everywhere. By the way, there are now companies which are actually making microbiome friendly and microbial cleaners. I have only been using those products at least for the last 7 years. I'll give you. Okay. Helminth therapy. This is also very interesting. So when we evolved, we also evolved with some worms, etc. They are what I call natural infections. Hookworms, etc. The Helminth species were natural infections that we had. Right? So it is amazing that those with serious autoimmune diseases, if they get a hookworm infection, the manifestation of the autoimmune disease comes down a lot. So what has effectively happened, if I simplify it in sort of without any jargon, our immune system is like a bunch of soldiers running around, right? You have deprived them of the enemy they have been pre-programmed to fight. So they're now looking for new enemies. So they're starting to attack your own, this thing, this must be the enemy, this looks a little different. By the way, the closest association also, which is a little different, I know I talked about MS. MS is often, the theory says two things. One, it is caused mainly by something called the Epstein-Barr virus. The Epstein-Barr virus is a virus which belongs to the herpes family. 99.9% of human beings have the Epstein-Barr virus. It's quite benign. But if you grow up in extra sanitized conditions, and your first exposure to the Epstein-Barr virus is after the age of 8 or 10, the chances are that same thing which is benign under normal circumstances can cause you MS. It actually distorts how your immune system sees things, and then the dairy protein looks very similar to the myelin protein in your nerves. Your immune system starts, in the presence of the Epstein-Barr virus, starts mistaking the myelin sheath for your dairy protein to be the myelin sheath. And this microbes is so important, right? And your hookworm infections, the microbes is so important that babies born with C-section actually have significantly more autoimmune diseases in their lifetimes. Right? So now, the sort of advanced hospitals, etc., they're using microbial swabs of the mother's vagina or the birth canal and putting it in the baby's mouth so that they don't have this impairment. Otherwise, the microbiome imprinting of babies born from C-sections is typically much more that of the skin microbiome rather than the... biology is so incredible. The microbial sort of ecosystem of the mother's birth canal just before birth changes. How does it change? Because the mother secretes things into the birth canal which are more friendly towards certain microbes which it wants for the baby. And I mentioned to you earlier, and the mother's milk contains oligosaccharides which feeds a lot of the microbes which the baby can't digest. Right? So this is a very imperative and essential part of our being, but we have forever ignored this in our managing our lifestyles. This is another very interesting Japanese study. We evolved moving through forests. It is amazing how much our immune system efficacy goes up, our stress levels come down, inflammation comes down by what? The simple activity of a forest walk. So tomorrow morning when you stretch out and sort of go through the walk on the pines, you are doing yourself an inordinate amount of good. So this afternoon as well. So the IMA is already, okay. And even things like, essential oils from pine trees, pepper trees. By the way, there's a pepper, an Indian pepper, the long Kerala pepper. I think it's called papli or whatever. Incredible health benefits, right? And again, so if you can take out time, spend time in forests. If you have grandchildren or children, take them to forests, let them play in forests. Why this is important is that most of the otherwise nature reserves we have has so many other chemicals in that, in the plant and vegetation that it causes another series of issues. Okay? And the other thing is that, the biggest feel-good factor is your serotonin. Where is this manufactured? Do you know? Where is 95% of the serotonin in your body manufactured? It's in your stomach, in your gut. Your microbes are doing this. So you look after your microbes if you want to feel happy. %95 is manufactured in the gut. Okay? And just look at the way autism is growing. How many of you know children who have ADHD, autism? These are all microbe, gut microbe related these things. And there are studies on rats, etc. If you sterilize them, right, they get depressed. They don't do anything. They sort of, are they feel kind of, and they won't even fight to save their lives if you remove their microbes. It's so much difference it makes, right? And again, the other big issue we have today is social media. Why is this such a big issue? So we are used to historically getting dopamine hits once in a while, right? And what is very interesting is that for you to feel it and feel the benefits of higher serotonin, dopamine, etc., you need to be at a higher baseline than you were. To get that same hit, you need to be at a higher baseline. Now, what is happening with likes on social media, on Instagram, this, that? You're getting this high and you're getting this validation all the time. So what is happening is that your entire architecture for these feel-good biochemicals is getting exhausted. So normal things which would give you a high are no longer giving you a high. And this is addictive, this is causing a problem. Now in several countries, the chief medical officer, etc., have all said that, this is something which should be stopped or banned. This anxiety is a very major issue today. Again, a lot of it is because of our lifestyles. Earlier, anxiety was a very useful social tool because you could get away from wild animals and these kinds of things using anxiety. It actually protected you. But today, your boss sort of raises an eyebrow, you get anxiety. Your customer is not happy with you, you get anxiety. Now, what was your body, the minute you get anxiety, got into this mode of fleeing, fighting or fleeing, right? So your other systems shut down, your blood went to these things. Now what happens is we sit there and we get anxiety. So the whole body gets distorted, which is why exercise is such an essential part of dealing with anxiety today. Right? Because what did you do when you had anxiety in the past? You ran or you fought, right? You did something physical. Now we just cogitate and sort of, drive ourselves nuts. Sedentary lifestyle. Please look at all the issues that the sedentary lifestyle causes us. We were used to foraging, we were used to moving. Not very fast, not like running, but we were used to walking all the time. We are walkers. If you don't walk, you will have health consequences, whether you like it or not. Right? And there's no right or wrong in terms of, how much is enough and all that stuff. The issue is to not for 1 hour, I will walk for 1 hour, this thing, okay, I've done so many steps. You are evolved to be forever moving. So please get up, from your desk, your computer, take a stroll around the office, take a stroll around your back, come back, sit down. But don't keep sitting there for hours. I'm guilty of it, I know. But circadian rhythm. This is such an important part of what we do and what we don't. Why is that? Because think of it historically. If you did not adhere to circadian rhythm, when do carnivores hunt? Early morning and dusk. What are they optimized for detecting? Movement. You are moving around, you're going to be lunch or dinner, or breakfast or dinner. So we have been evolved to being perfectly still. Right? And following the circadian rhythm. But what is very interesting is that not only us, and we are, because our lymphatic system cleans out during the night. Our brains are cleaned out during the night. The surest way of getting mental diseases later on in age are to have lack of sleep. I'm surely going to get it because I am always chronically short of sleep. So, it's only a question of time till I get mentally retarded. But that's at least I know what's going to happen. And metabolism slows down at night. Your lymphatic system gets cleaned. Your gut activity, enzyme production, everything, your body is evolved for that. But not only that, your microbes have a rhythm. If you don't follow it, even your microbes get messed up. So following a circadian rhythm is essential. That's what we've evolved for. Now I know in our practical lives you cannot adhere to it, you cannot do it fully. But it is to the extent that you can mimic this, you will be healthier and you will be happier. We don't have time, right? I will just skip the business and economics. The one thing I want to talk about is this whole, what is happening is I didn't cover this bit. I just want to cover one bit. That is this suicide and desensitization. Again, mental health issues have gone up like crazy, right? And you see people committing suicide, etc. And why does this exist from an evolutionary perspective? It shouldn't, no? Why does it still exist? So suicide is a very funny phenomenon. Suicide is actually a cry for help. If somebody is actually contemplating suicide, talking about suicide, it's a pleading for help. When they feel powerless, when they feel that something is going wrong with their lives and they have no control over it. Suicide, now you would say that why kill yourself to do it? No, they don't actually want to kill themselves. But they want to do something which is serious enough so that people take notice. You end up sometimes ending up dead as a consequence, but your signaling is only effective if you do it seriously enough. That's why it still exists in our ecosystem. It's basically a cry for help. Okay? Thank you. I think we should pack this. I think this bit we can skip.
Yeah. No, I don't think we have time. I'm sorry. It's 11:30. We have to start the next session, unfortunately, at 10 to 12. But he's here. He's not going away anywhere, so you just catch him and run him through. Rahul.
Sure.
Yeah.
Look, the rest of it is very boring for me because I teach that in business school. But this was different. The rest of it you'll get in a lot of management. In fact...
no, we'll still want the slides.
Yeah, you can have
Doesn't
the slides.
matter whether we get
I
them.
will only request one thing, that give me a little time. This was all done last night. I'll clean them up and share it with all of you.
Yeah, we'll hassle them, don't worry. We'll get the slides and we'll put them out together with the conclusion paper. Suraj is here, he's taking notes, and he'll knit it all together beautifully. You have my word. Brilliant, Rahul. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take a quick break for 20 minutes, reassemble here. We'll have a session for about an hour and 10 minutes, and we will close on dot at 1 o'clock, so you can go and grab a light lunch and then head out for a long walk.